Professor Eva Heidbreder. You are a professor for European multilevel governance, a political scientist at Freie Universität Berlin, and you are invited in Geneva to do a talk about Germany and the future of the European Union. So, what is your argument about this topic? Could you please give us a summary in a few minutes?
Well, it's of course a big topic, and it is a question that is constantly being asked. What is the future of the European Union, and what is the role of Germany, this big state? The biggest economy in Europe with a stable government. So what is Germany in the EU and how will the EU be? Generally, there's usually two images that people have in their mind. The one is about a big German hegemon. Germany ruling Europe and opposing German views on the rest of Europe. The other image that is coming up increasingly is that in a lot of states in Europe, populism is rising in that, and that Germany is the last stronghold of democracy. So these are two extreme images, but when we ask about the future of Europe and Germany, these are two very dominant narratives. Now, as a researcher being faced with these two images, we of course have to ask how much are facts behind it, how much is myth. So what I will briefly do is go through these two images and give you some background on how much there is to it. The first image, and that's this, that's the one of the German hegemon, right? Germany ruling Europe. Is that true? Do we have evidence for that? Generally speaking, no. And there is a couple of arguments why we cannot see Germany or any other member state as a hegemon that is really ruling the European continent like a former emperor or king. Why not? First, the institutional setup of the EU and how it works is just built that no single state can rule. And you see that throughout. You see that in the case of Germany very clearly when Germany tried to develop a common migration policy and was apparently alone, right? But we see that also in other policies. Germany, for instance, was very reluctant on the question of a banking union, but was outruled outruled. So even in economic areas, in certain economic areas, Germany is not a clear hegemon. And there's a third point that is important, and that is the internal politics, because most Germans don't have the ambition. And this is a historical trajectory, really, that at best Germany has been described as a reluctant hegemon, but really the evidence is weak for that. That said, when it comes to one policy area, and that is fiscal policy, we get this image as well, that is Germany not so much in the banking union or monetary policy, what the ECB does, but in fiscal policy, in austerity policies, and in an ordoliberal approach to fiscal policy is very, very dominant. And that has to do also with circumventing the usual European decision-making mode, as we've seen in the Euro crisis, at the height of the crisis, where the heads of state and government got together to do major decisions, and really in this free competition of forces between states, Germany has been very dominant. So much on the first issue. So Germany is not an hegemon, but it is very dominant in certain policy areas. The other image is the one, Europe is about to explode, right? There's migration, there's the euro, there's Brexit, there's rising populism. And in this discourse, we sometimes see competing demands on Germany, that Germany should take the lead, that Germany should save Europe, a bit like this, a hen sitting on the egg of the European Union and even liberal democracy to safeguard it. How much truth is to that? First, is the EU really about to explode? Not immediately, really, but there are crucial challenges. And I'd say they have a different urgency. One challenge that we are dealing with is Brexit. Brexit indeed is a challenge for the EU because for the first time a country voluntarily wants to leave the Union. But there are procedures, there are ways of doing it, and it is proceeding. This doesn't need to mean to escalate to a bigger crisis, as long, and there Germany and other states come in, as long as the 27 are arguing for their common interests, and it doesn't fall apart into 27 separate interests. Germany plays a role in that, indeed, as do the other member states. Right? So this is a common effort. Populism, rising populism. Also here, the issue about the EU is that a lot of people don't see enough legitimacy in the EU. And here we have a more complicated problem, which again, Germany alone cannot fix, but is an issue about all member states. And that is, how do you speak about the EU? How do you present it? How honest are you as a national policymakers about problems coming from the EU or solutions coming from the EU? And a major problem there is usually that problems are framed as, here's the state and there's the EU, instead of defining problems as we have a common goal, like reducing unemployment and that, and how do all the levels work together. This is a structural problem in the EU. The more people are afraid of the EU, the more people are afraid they could lose out of certain policies, the more urgent this becomes. Germany has, in the past years, not been particularly good internally to blur this distinction, to say that is the EU and that is us. But this is, again, a task for all member states, which Germany cannot solve. These two problems, Brexit and populism, I think can be contained. It gets more difficult if they get gained up with other problems, especially the Eurozone and institutional problems in the Eurozone. There could be new speculation at one point of Brexit and this would be a real problem. And what I said earlier about fiscal policy dominance of Germany will play a role. This is the area where Germany is dominant, but can neither fix it alone nor blow it up. Right. Migration is the last area that is crucial, and that shows us another problem the EU has, and that is about joint decision making. Having a general common goal and then saying, okay, we can argue about the road, how to get there, but we agree that we have generally a common goal. And this is the heart of the Euro crisis. I'm pretty sure that any way to pick out one country that should pull out the EU cannot work, because the only way the EU works, and that's written in its institutional DNA, and that is the only way policies can come about, is cooperation. Thus, this question, what is Germany's role in the EU, can only be a role, how do states cooperate in the EU, and how do we use the European institutions, and which policy outputs do we want? So the conclusion is, in the end, to overcome the real problems we have in these various crises, we should get away from these kinds of questions of, does the EU have a future, do we need more or less EU, and are states the answer? I think the questions are wrongly asked. The point is that what the EU can do is that there is a way of cooperation across different levels on policies, and it has to bring out or develop programs on how to deal with certain problems, and that will also remedy the major problem of European democracy, because that speaks to people. Abstract words about more or less EU, what is that meant to be? But concrete proposals by one party and another about how to deal with unemployment, how to deal with migration and all that, that is something that also gets people really moving. So the EU is often described as a bicycle, and if you stop paddling, it just falls over. I think we have to expand this picture to get the right picture on the EU, and that is that the EU is not one bicycle, but that we have to realize that the EU is actually a huge tandem. And the EU is not only Brussels, but it's the European level, the state level, the regions, and the municipalities. And all that together is Europe. Brussels is not Europe. Brussels is all that together. And to take people on board and to find the right solutions, Europe has to happen at all these places together with policies, with people and programs. So that is, in my view, the way forward. And Germany must play a role in that, but it's a common effort, and that is what the EU is basically about.